everyone. Welcome to our second webinar in our AI in Practice webinar series. My name is Dr. Jessica Stansberry, and I am the Director for Teaching and Learning Excellence with our Center for Excellence in Learning, Teaching, and Technology with the University of Baltimore. We are very excited to have this series for the fall, and I want to give a special thanks to our co-collaborators in this series from Johns Hopkins University, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, and also our Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation here at the University of Baltimore as well. So with that, I am going to get us started, and I'm going to introduce our speaker, Mike Kentz. And Mike Kentz is an award-winning educator with over 14 years of experience across journalism and teaching. He is a TEDx speaker, and his work in AI and education has been featured in EdSurge, Edtopia, The Wall Street Journal, Canadian National Radio, and more. His workshops have been formulated as a product of direct classroom experience in 23-24, when he developed a groundbreaking approach to teaching with AI in the classroom that has since been accepted for presentation at multiple national and regional education conferences. His work focuses on AI literacy and the intersection of AI and assessments, and we are very excited to have him with us today. And with that, I am going to turn it over to our guest, Mike.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that kind introduction, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me and us here today for your lunch break, probably in the middle of the week here. Today's presentation is going to focus on AI literacy for adults, and we're going to take what I think is a little bit of a unique approach in the sense that we're not going to necessarily take a STEM focus. We're going to take a humanities approach to this. So if you are a humanities teacher, as I have been, a lot of what I say today, I think is going to sort of resonate intuitively with you. But either way, honestly, I think you're going to see that there's some pretty nice analogies and sort of common sense approaches to working with AI that can help you feel safe, responsible, and effective all at the same time. So the first thing I'd like to do is just put out a quick Zoom survey just to see where everybody is at on their AI journey, if you want to call it that. And what I'd like to ask is if you could just quickly answer this question: how often do you use a Gen AI platform each week, or how many times? Just give me a sense of where everybody is at. That'll help me in terms of shaping my language so it's accessible for everybody. You'll see there's an option for what is a Gen AI platform, which is totally fine. If you're coming here and this is kind of your first exposure to AI literacy or the concept, that's totally fine. This is going to be accessible for everybody. And I think for the folks that are using it pretty often, not only will it be accessible, but you might be able to use some of this language in your conversations with other people as you collaborate. And once we get, Julia, I think you can see how many people have answered. Once we get a decent plurality, we can go ahead and I think close that. Yeah, let's go ahead and close it. Let's see where people are at. Okay. All right. This is okay. This is I don't want to say it's as I expected, but it's pretty similar when I do this workshop, that we have a lot of participants who have used it a handful of times, maybe once a week or something like that. There's some familiarity, but not necessarily feeling very confident or wanting to use it all the time. And then we also have some people who are coming in here completely fresh, which is great. All of these perspectives are relevant and important, and I hope this gives you a sense of where your colleagues are at too. Because the more we start to communicate about this and the more we start to collaborate, the better this charting of a pathway forward for education and for us as adults is going to be. So thank you very much for participating in that. And what we're going to do now is jump to one of three core questions of this presentation. And the first one is this question of what is AI literacy. And, I don't know how much you've thought about this, but I'll tell you this. When I first started diving into this, and it was about a year and a few months, about a year and 3 months ago, that I really turned my focus towards, I want to figure out what this is. My first reaction was that it felt quite overwhelming. And one of the first sort of infographics or resources that I found is on the next slide. This is from Georgia Tech's research arm, and they've got a competencies and design considerations for AI literacy. I'll give you a second just to skim it. I'm not going to ask you to read every part of it, but I just want you to skim it for a second. Now, my question for you as you skim it is going to show up on the screen. Does this feel complicated to you? Does this feel complicated enough to you? The very first time I saw this, I was like, this is not even helpful because it's so overwhelming and it feels like I don't even know what half of these words mean. And so, in the process of developing my own AI literacy, I've realized a few things and I've tried to break it down in a way that's a little bit less overwhelming, a little bit easier to understand. And in order to get to that place, I'm going to use an analogy. And if we were in person, what I would do right now is I would ask everybody to look at this picture and I would ask you to raise your hand if you know how this works. And this is a car engine, and you can, if you want to throw in the chat a yes or a no, you're more than welcome to. Question is, do you know how this car engine works? Now, the answer tends to be across a wide range of people that not many people actually know how a car engine works. You might know a little bit, but generally speaking, most of us don't know how a car engine works. And yet, how many of us drove to work today, or how many of us will be in a car later today? And if you think about this for a second, it's quite relevant because the skills I need to drive a car are almost completely separate from knowing how the actual technology works itself. And this is an extremely important recognition in the context of AI literacy because when I go to most AI webinars, the first picture I see is the one in the bottom left right now. And it throws me off. I don't know about you, but it throws me off. And if you don't know what this is a neural network. It's essentially the engine or the machine that is underneath ChatGPT and every large language model that you're kind of hearing about now. And if you look at these two pictures next to each other, you can kind of see the similarities already, right? These are the engines. But I'm not going to focus on the engine today because what I've learned from using AI a lot is that the skills I need to drive the car, the skills I need to engage with the technology safely and responsibly, same way I safely and responsibly drive a car, are completely separate from knowing how the engine works. So if you're a person who's like, I don't even want to engage with AI because they all talk about neural networks and machine learning, we're not going to touch on that at all today. Instead, if you look at that bottom right picture, you'll notice, what is this person doing? Now, you could say typing or you could say writing. They're writing. And when you work with a large language model, you're using language. You're writing and you're reading, writing and reading. And so what I've done is try to break AI literacy down into an easier way of understanding it. And what I want to try to do is leverage our existing skills rather than try to reinvent the wheel with entirely new systems of understanding. And so going from left to right, if we start over here on the left with machine literacy, this is technical studies. It's still interesting to study computational thinking and clustering and natural language processing, don't get me wrong. However, if you study this particular part of the discipline, what you are studying to be is a mechanic, right? You're studying to be a mechanic. Nothing wrong with that. If you want to go for it, don't get me wrong, go for it, right? But it's not going to teach you how to drive the car. It's going to teach you how to build or fix the engine. In the center, we have what I call historical studies. This is a little bit, has to do with philosophy, has to do with history, cultural studies. How is this going to impact the way we interact with each other? Data ethics, things like this. I like to think of American studies as being sort of a great encompassing of this particular skill. But the one I care about the most, and the one that will affect the most number of people, including pretty much everybody on this webinar today, I call LLM literacy. LLM stands for large language model, and this is a way of me breaking out, because there are many different types of AI. We want to break it out and get down to these large language models like ChatGPT that communicate to us with language. And this particular skill is about safe and responsible and effective use. And if you look at this bottom right corner, again, it's a humanities skill. Why? Because I'm writing, I'm reading, and I'm engaging with text and language. And so what I hope this does for you, again, is make it less overwhelming and also make you realize, you know what? Especially if you're a humanities teacher, there's a real irony here that humanities folks in general, including myself, tend to be the most reluctant to engage with AI for a good reason. Plenty of good reasons why you might not feel comfortable or might not want to. Totally understand that. But the irony is you are actually set up to be the best user, and you are set up to be the best person to lead the conversation about AI literacy. And, I don't want to make it too much of an us versus them, but this portion is not a computer science skill. And so what we really need, if you're an English teacher out there, this is me calling out to you. We need English teachers, we need writers, we need journalists, we need creative writers, history teachers, communication professors to step up because you know how to do this already. Okay? So what this aims to do is answer the question of what? What is AI literacy? There is also another really important question. Why? Why is this even important? Because you might be sitting here and saying to yourself, I was fine before these tools came along. I was very happy. I was, enjoyed my life, enjoyed my work, and now all of a sudden I'm being told I have to learn how these things work. Excuse me, no thank you. And I totally understand that. You might also be saying, why do I have to teach AI literacy? That's not what I signed up to do. Okay, I do think AI literacy is important. And in order to establish why it's important, I did my best because to find data. Normally, when we try to prove that something is important, we rely on concrete, scientific, tangible data. But there's a problem here. AI literacy is only 2 years old as a concept, and these large language models have essentially only existed, at least in public, for only 2 years, which means I don't have any data that I can rely on to prove to you that not having AI literacy could lead to some serious negative consequences and damages. So when that happens, what we have to do is rely on past experience to help us understand the present moment. And when we do that, what we're really doing is creating analogies to help us understand the situation. So in order to establish why AI literacy is important, I'm going to present another analogy. And I'm going to start with an academic paper that was published about 2 months ago. And it's got a very catchy title. It's called ChatGPT is Bullshit. If you haven't read it, if you haven't heard about it, I would recommend reading it. It's a really good paper. And there's some real truth here. As you probably have heard, ChatGPT and other LLMs can hallucinate. Even more than that, it's even more nuanced than that because sometimes it's not necessarily outright lying, it's just not quite giving you the whole truth. And it's also sort of dressing things up in this sophisticated language that makes it difficult to catch. It's a really good bullshitter, basically. But here's the other thing. AI is actually pretty useful. It actually can be very, very helpful. So let's stop and think about this. We've got a thing that is useful. It's a little bit dangerous, or it kind of lies to us a little bit. But it's also sort of a necessary part of our society at this point. It's everywhere around us. So let's ask ourselves the question: what in our current society is useful and necessary to a degree, but also is frankly pretty full of shit? Here's my answer: a used car salesman. Okay, so generative AI in a lot of ways is a lot like a used car salesman. Why? Well, we do need used car salesmen, right? Because if I want to go buy a car and I don't have enough money to buy a new car, I need somebody to sell me that used car. But at the same time, when I interact with this person, and by the way, if anybody has like relatives who are used car salesmen, please receive this in the spirit in which it's intended. But the point here is this is a conversational interaction with something that is sending language towards me that's very difficult to discern the level of truth, the real truth, right? But again, it's an important, necessary part of the ecosystem of our world. Okay, so to really hammer home why AI literacy in the form that I'm talking about is important, I'd like you to picture for a second that you have a son or a daughter. If you have one, you're good to go. If you don't, just imagine that you do. So Imagine that your son or daughter is 18 years old, 22 years old, 25 years old, however, in that range. And they live in a different city and they call you up and they say, I'm going to go buy a car, but I don't have enough money for a new car. I'm going to go buy a used car. And you say to your son, immediately your antenna go up because you want to help your son or daughter handle this interaction in a way that's not going to get them burned or screwed over. You want them to have very well developed bullshit detectors. And you also want to help them to ask the right questions, right? You might even over the phone say, okay, here's your list of 5 or 10 questions that you have to ask. But at the end of the day, when you hang up that phone, you know there's a certain part of that interaction that you can't teach, right? It's a soft skill. It involves experience. It involves kind of having been there before, but it also involves a really close relationship with language, being able to pick up on those tells. To use poker as an analogy, picking up on those tells that come out in our language when someone is bullshitting us. And so, why is AI literacy important? Because it's going to be everywhere around you. It is bullshitting you. And it's a lot like talking to a used car salesman. And so we need to develop the skills that help us be confident in these interactions because you may not even realize it, but it's already embedded in so many technological platforms. So we got to protect ourselves. We've got to get safe use principles using our communication skills and our BS detectors. Okay, so hopefully, to the best of my ability, I'm trying to establish again why it's important. Hopefully, you feel like, all right, yeah, I get it. I'm gonna have to have a conversation with this thing at some point in my life. I hope I have the skills at that point to navigate it. So, in that context, we're really asking ourselves 2 questions, and they're boxed off in the red and the blue. We've deleted machine literacy and philosophical studies. We're not going to deal with those. Question number 1, in the context of safe and effective use of AI, how do we protect our thinking? How do we protect our role in the process of creating, in the process of learning, in the process of doing? How do we protect our humanity? But we're not just going to maintain this all, for lack of a better word, negative approach because, as I said before, AI can be really, really useful if we know how to leverage it the right way. So the second question is, how can we leverage AI to be more creative, do better work, and even make our lives better? And we're going to leverage these skills. So here we go. The first thing you're going to want to do before you even start talking to AI is focus on the fact that you are a collaborator with AI and not a commander. The interaction with AI is more like a conversational dialogue than it is a user command interaction. That might sound counterintuitive. It might sound a little bit off, but bear with me. I'm going to do my best to explain it. Traditional technology fits into the user command interaction interface. We press a button, we get the result that we wanted, or we don't, right? That is not the case with a large language model because it is spitting language at us that we then need to critically review. So instead, and also, by the way, I'm not going to look at it as if it's commanding me. Both of those are true. I'm not a commander and neither is it. Instead, we're using it as a collaborator, a mutual relationship where I have as much control, frankly, should have a little bit more. And in that case, we're going to maintain the right approach. So in that context, to just sort of explain this a little bit more, one of the foundational questions that everybody needs to ask before they start engaging with AI is, should we anthropomorphize AI? Anthropomorphize AI means to treat it more like it's a human when it's not, or treat it like it's a human when it's not. And again, your initial reaction to this might be, hold on a second, that's crazy. Why would I do that? Bear with me. Here we go. Now, as we know, AI is technology. I am not saying that it's sentient. I am not saying that it's a human at all, at all. It is technology. But here's the problem. It communicates like a human, and it doesn't interact like any of our other traditional technologies. Let me give you an example to try to illustrate the point. When you walk into a room and you turn on a light, none of us stop and look at that light and think to ourselves, I got to critically review this for a second and analyze it to see if it's working. We don't do that, right? When we work with a computer, we turn it on or we press enter, something like that. We don't stop and critically analyze the computer to determine whether or not it worked. It's just we don't need to, because it's a binary outcome. Either the light goes on or it doesn't. Either the computer works or it doesn't. And the same would apply to really every traditional technology that we have, including, for example, a TV. We just don't engage in that type of critical review. So in that regard, approaching it like it is a technology can actually be a mistake because you're going to treat it like it's one of these three things, and it's simply not. So as a result, if now again, it's a tough question, okay? There's no real right answer, but it's something you have to ask yourself. Because if it is spitting out language to me and we are engaged in a conversation, then it might be more effective to look at it more like it's a human. Now, the last thing I'll point out on this slide is two things. One is we're making a choice about which way to lean. We're not going all the way in one direction, and we're not going all the way in the other direction. And if you notice in the middle in the Venn diagram, I didn't put any words, and I did that on purpose. Because right now, where we are in the context of developing AI literacy, we don't have any language. We literally do not have language to describe the nature of this interaction because everything that we have is split out on one side or the other of this Venn diagram. So as you develop your AI literacy, this space is going to expand. That's what needs to happen, and it frankly will happen over the next couple of years. The space will expand and we'll have an entirely new understanding, language, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm going to tell you which way I lean and why, okay? You may even be able to guess it by the way that I'm talking. I lean towards human because these just simply don't cut it for me. And I know how to have a conversation. I know how to critically review language. I know how to write good questions. I know how to ask good questions. So I feel more comfortable in the conversational dialogue side. But in order to bring myself back, and what I would recommend that you do if you do choose this human side, is approach AI with a level of stranger danger, okay? Almost like it's a supposedly brilliant stranger. The relevance here is that we all intuitively and through our experience know not to automatically trust a stranger. I would go even as far as like we know not to automatically even trust a friend, right? I mean, a friend says something to us, we still process it and determine whether or not it's actually something we want to act on. Not to say that you think your friend is lying, but the point is you still process and digest it, and that's the human element of it. But bringing it more towards a stranger brings us back to the middle, and it increases our skepticism and our critical review of the language that's coming at us. Because if this gentleman here, this dapper gentleman, comes up to me at a cocktail party and he starts telling me all these things that I should do with my life, I'm actually going to stop and go, I don't know about that, right? So again, a supposedly brilliant stranger, I think, is a very nice human analogy that keeps us towards the center of that last Venn diagram that I showed. Now, how do we do this in practice, right? I've given you a lot of theory, a lot of philosophy, a lot of concepts. There is actually one really effective core principle, and I'm going to show it to you on this slide. When you interact with AI, it is highly effective to ask for suggestions and options, not answers or opinions. And there are a number of reasons why this is effective. The first one I will focus on is that AI does not have any answers. It does not know anything. It does not have experience, and it does not have any opinions, and it does not have expertise. None of those words apply to what AI is doing underneath. So as a result, what this also does, if I ask for suggestions and options, I maintain control of the interaction. Because now it's a brainstorming partner and I am still reviewing the responses and considering what I want to do with it. And I'm maintaining agency, independence, control, and choice. And this is something that some other folks have said, but I don't think we've gone deep enough with it yet. A lot of people like to focus on prompt engineering. I think that's not a good, that is a decent place to start, but this is foundational. This comes before prompt engineering, because then when you start actually writing your prompts, you know, I got to make sure I keep this open-ended in nature. Now, much like pretty much every human in the world, I don't always practice what I preach. And I wanted to share an example from last week that actually illustrates the difference I'm talking about. So every couple of nights at my house, I am in charge of dinner, as you probably are too. And here's the problem though, I am not a cook. I don't know anything about cooking at all. And my wife does not appreciate it when I constantly ask her questions about what to do because she feels like she's supposed to be her night off. So recently I've started using ChatGPT as a helper. The other night I asked it this question. I said, "Hey ChatGPT, what should I make for dinner?" First thing I want to do is ask you to just think about that question. Don't look at the answer yet. Just focus on the question. What should I make for dinner? And consider for a second that one human being is walking up to another human being and saying, "Hey, what should I make for dinner?" Now, if I asked you that, you would probably say something like, "I don't know, whatever you want." Right? A human being would know how to say that's almost a nonsensical question. How do I know what you should make for dinner? ChatGPT doesn't know that. AI doesn't know that. AI will always give you an answer even when you ask a nonsensical question. But more importantly, look at the answer. AI has given me one option: lemon, garlic, butter, shrimp. Now, I happen to like lemon, garlic, butter, shrimp, and if I have all the ingredients, I honestly might go ahead and do it. But when I stopped and thought about this for a second, I said, I'm not practicing what I'm preaching. I'm not doing what I should. So instead, I went back and asked a different question. What could I make for dinner? What should? What could? Notice the difference in the response. In this case, I get 6 options, 6 choices. I now have a menu. And if you think about cognitively what I now have to do versus over here, I have to read. I have to read, I have to think, I have to determine what would be the best choice in my particular context. And I am still in control. I'm the one who's making the selection. Over here, I've asked it for an answer as if there's a correct answer to this question. There is no correct answer to this question, but AI is going to pretend like there is no matter what. So the point here is that small linguistic changes like changing from should to could, that's 3 letters, actually dramatically impact the nature of our interaction with AI. So you're going to want to push yourself to ask open-ended questions to maintain that safety. I've put together a short list of a couple of examples of how making these small linguistic changes can, again, impact the nature of our interaction. How would you could change to how could you? Of course, what should to what could. How do I? How can I? Why did this happen? Well, list potential reasons why this happened. Now, if you're a professor, by the way, I should say this, but this all comes from me analyzing my students' use with AI. This is where a lot of these conclusions came from. And if you are a professor who is looking at your students' AI interactions, you're going to see a lot of this, even at the university level, because we as human beings have not figured this out yet. And we are still not recognizing again, the impact of our linguistic choices on the interaction itself. So this is also a way to give feedback to students. If you're at the point where you're starting to talk about AI literacy or how to use it safely, put one up on the screen. Put your own transcript up on the screen, or your own chat up on the screen, and ask students to look at it. Give them this principle, see what they say. I think you will find this to be a very illuminating process. Okay, another piece, and I moved faster through this than I thought I would. It looks like I'm kind of ahead of schedule. But earlier I talked about how journalistic thinking is a helpful way to look at this. And earlier Jessica mentioned it, but I'll reiterate it. My first career was as a journalist. I was a financial journalist for 6 years and then made the switch to education. And as I was working with AI over the last year and a half, I started to recognize that what I was doing was very similar to conducting an interview. Because what I am doing with AI is I'm asking a question, receiving an answer, asking a question, receiving an answer. And beyond that, I have a deeper goal in mind as a journalist. Now, this could be, for the journalists out there, you'll know what I mean. This could be an on-background conversation or an on-the-record conversation. Either way, I have a goal. I'm trying to get to some sort of deeper truth, whether it's fact-based or just sort of an important concept or something like that. And in this way, the question answer process very much mirrors that journalism approach. Additionally, let me just say a few more things about this. A journalist, when they are engaged in this process, considers all perspectives before asking a question. This is part of asking good questions, taking stock, reflecting on the whole situation, determining where everything is coming from, determining my own purpose, and then making very specific syntax, word choice, linguistic choices in the formulation of my question to get to that deeper goal. And that's the asking good questions piece of this. And the last, I've already sort of talked about this, is that BS detector piece. Journalists are trained to have good BS detectors because almost everybody you talk to, when you are seeking the truth, people tend to obfuscate quite a bit, and they tend to maybe not outright lie, but sort of shade the truth. And then catching those different white lies, if you want to call them that, again, requires a really close relationship with language. Now, again, I finished a little earlier than I thought, and I'll check in with, well, let's do this. First thing I want to say is if you are interested in learning more, and I do have some more things I can say, but if you're interested in learning more about this approach, I do want to just let you know, my goal is to build lots and lots of curriculum resources, AI literacy learning resources, and that is essentially what I'm working on now. And what you see on the screen here is my website. I have a blog that is free, and I post a lot of my thoughts on there. Feel free to email me directly. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, and I have an Instagram account. So at this point, I think it might be a good idea to open up for Q&A. And I know, Julia, I think you were going to maybe manage that process.
Absolutely. So first off, thank you so much, Mike, again, for joining us today. My name is Julia Gofretti. I am the Emerging Learning Technology Lead with the University of Baltimore. We're so grateful to be able to continue this series with you and learned a lot. You know, I very much appreciate a good analogy. I was a language teacher for many, many years, and you know, words matter and the words we use matter. So as Mike mentioned, the Q&A feature is open, so please feel free to put your questions in. I will be keeping an eye on them. But I'll start off. You know, you were mentioning the one of the activities you did with your students where you have them, you know, looking at your own conversation with an AI tool. I'm wondering if you would be able to share another impactful lesson that you've had recently that worked well with your students.
Yeah, we've reviewed a number of different sort of approaches, and then one of the things that I did with them, because I had them look at mine, but then I also generated fictional interactions where I pretended to be a student. But what I did in that context is create an interaction that was, I guess you could call it an exemplar, or at least what I wanted to see from my students. And then I created one that was a non-exemplar. And I made them about 5 pages long so that it wasn't a ton of reading, or too much reading, I should say. And then I anonymized them so that they didn't know which one was good or bad. I gave them the bad one first and had them answer a series of questions. You know, what do you think of this AI user? Are they asking good questions? Are they engaging the right way? What could they have done differently? And the interesting part is even a quote unquote bad transcript, students tend to see it at first and they go, that's pretty good, until they see the exemplar. And once they've seen a good one against a bad one, and this applies to adults too. I've noticed this with adults because we kind of need to pull our transcripts off the platform in order to see them really clearly. And if we do that and see a good one against a bad one, we start to go, oh, okay, I kind of get what, safe use or effective use might actually look like.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
We do have a couple questions popping in. I'm going to start with the first one that came in. How much can creating a persona or explaining yourself to interact with an LLM improve the response you get?
My answer to that is it appears to help quite a bit. The difficulty is if I put in that approach here, I can't actually recreate that moment. So it's difficult to know for sure. But the research indicates that it's effective. And I would say anecdotally, from my experience, it's very effective. And I think the reason why it's effective is because what we're doing is we're providing context to the bot. And this is helpful even in conversation. If I'm talking to another person and I'm going to ask them a question, I'm going to give them a bunch of context, let them know what I'm thinking, let them know who I'm asking them to essentially be in order to, mimic the situation and give me advice. And so saying to AI, you are a established playwright, or you are an established script writer, you are an established, I don't know, what else could there be, artist, whatever it might be. does a good job. It narrows the corpus of what AI is pulling from and gives it that context to be more specific when it answers you. So my general answer is I definitely think it's effective, but it's not the only way. There are so many ways to do this.
Awesome. I really like this next question, really important. So what are your thoughts on assisting or helping students, leading students whose first language isn't English? Are they at a disadvantage? And if so, how might you address that equity issue?
I'm going to be honest, I definitely think they are at a disadvantage, but I should also add that most of the large language model platforms do work across other languages. So in that event, if you're using, not every single one, but a lot of them do, you can have them change to their native language. That should help a little bit. But of course, if you're teaching your class in English, that's not necessarily, or if you don't speak the language, then you can't necessarily analyze their transcripts. So your question is a good one. I think students I do think students are disadvantaged in that situation. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think it's a big question and I don't have the answer, and I don't think anybody does right now. I think that's a big research point right now, is to figure out how to address equity in those situations.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So working with the analogies, I'm seeing a lot of people really enjoying the analogies. How do you advise students as they carry the brilliant stranger perspective forward when one is engaging with that stranger on a daily basis? So how do you keep it from being too familiar? Do you advise that they consider a different stranger each day? What are your suggestions?
There's sort of two answers to this. In the first, I want to acknowledge that whoever wrote this question, you got to the exact problem. Because the issue is, the more you use AI, the more you start to kind of trust it, until you have sort of this embarrassing moment. This is something that I talk about a lot, is going back to that used car salesman analogy. You kind of don't know how to navigate that until you've made a mistake and had something bad happen. Now, I'm not saying like force your students to have something bad happen. What I would say to them is start with that stranger danger option, and then give them a lot of feedback. Because if you're giving them a lot of feedback, you're going to catch them getting into that trustworthy place and be able to personally say to them, like, hey, it kind of looks like you're assuming it knows a lot more than it does. Do you want to back up and maybe think about your prompt a little bit more? Or do you want to maybe closely read this a little bit more? I will acknowledge that's not a perfect answer, and it requires quite a bit of energy and time and effort. But it's the closest that I can find to getting to that place of keeping them in the middle, to your point, and not trusting it too much.
Wonderful. Before continuing with the questions that are in the Q&A, I wanted to share a question that was shared by one of our partners with this series from UMBC. And the question is, in terms of building AI skills, what types of exercises might you suggest to people to help them build skills to review AI output quickly and respond iteratively?
Yeah, I sort of mentioned it earlier. And this is a long one. It's almost like a separate workshop, how to actually teach effective AI use. And this is very much foundational. And the next level is like, what are the strategies? I will tell you that earlier I said pulling your transcript out of the platform, I actually think is a hugely important thing. And what this relies on is Marshall McLuhan's research about the medium affecting the way we interact with content. As you may know, he famously said the medium is the message. And so what I think is happening right now is we're interacting with these AI platforms, and it's a brand new medium, and none of us have a relationship with it, and we are forming a relationship with it without even realizing it. So what I did for myself and what I did for my students is I pulled it out, printed it out for them, or you could even just put it into a Word document or a Google document. I know it sounds overly simplistic, but the beauty of it is you're going to be working with it in a medium that you're already familiar with, and I guarantee you it will look different to you. And what you then do is go through that chat, that transcript of your own, and pretend that the user on the page is not you. Pretend that the user on the page is your student. And just think to yourself, what would I say to them? And it's not a clean answer, but I think the process will start to get you, okay, now I know what I would say to a student in that situation because I said it to myself, right? I modeled it with myself first, and then I'm going to be more comfortable saying it to them.
Thank you so much. Back to our Q&A questions. I do just want to quickly address, this one's not necessarily a question, but more of a, an appreciation of your materials. And I'm just kind of curious, are these exemplars or things that you have shared available on your website or your blog, or are attendees able to find some of these materials maybe to bring into their own classrooms?
Sure. So I give out those exemplars actually as a part of this program that I run called the Craft program. Um, I could share it with you guys if you want. It's not fully polished because it's a really small group of people, but you can also join the Craft program if you want. We meet every other Tuesday night over Zoom. It's collaborative reform for AI focused teaching. The short answer is yes, I'm happy to share. I just have to think about maybe how to clean it up a little bit so that it's ready for public consumption.
Sure. So what I would say for our attendees, keep following Mike, keep an eye out on what he's doing. Going back to some of our questions, do you see a benefit of using one AI platform over the other? There's different types of large language models out there right now. Would you prioritize the intended purpose before making a decision, or which approach might foster a more effective dialogue?
Fantastic question. I'll answer that second one first. Would you prioritize the intended purpose before making a decision? Yes. Now, the differences between these are very nuanced and subtle. And also I think because they're developing so fast, it's kind of changing like every other month. So, keep that in mind as you consume this information. Just as an example of some of the differences, Claude has what they call an AI constitution in its sort of black box model, which they also shared with the public. And so it tends to be safer, for lack of a better word. It tends to kind of have a little bit, it won't do sort of crazy things. But Claude is also, in my opinion, the best for creative writing. I engage in a lot of creative writing, and I always prefer to use Claude. Um, I don't have a lot of experience with Gemini, but from what I understand, since Gemini is kind of embedded into the Google ecosystem as opposed to being its own chatbot, it's very good at sort of structured tasks that live within your Google ecosystem. It's not necessarily a great brainstorm partner on its own, but if you're working with data in your Google ecosystem, Gemini can be quite helpful. And then there was one point I wanted to make on that question was just so you know, Microsoft Copilot is actually running on ChatGPT 4. It's not its own model. That's because Microsoft owns a great deal of OpenAI and they've essentially licensed it. And I think there was one more question. I can't quite remember what it was. I can't see it, but I hope that what I said answered it to enough.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that was very helpful. Thank you. When you asked, what do we need, but is not reliable instead of a used car salesman, I thought of the media. Can you take that analogy further? For example, how do you determine which media to trust when you don't know how it works and you know on some level that it doesn't actually know anything?
Uh, I'll try. What I will say is, so when I originally made that slide, I actually was gonna do it all about social media. And I thought to myself, you know what? People have kind of talked about that a lot. We've sort of done that. So let me see if I can come up with a different analogy. So the first point is, I think you're right. Media, absolutely, especially social media. I actually kind of think social media is a better proxy for this experience. Um, but that's a much larger sort of political and cultural discussion. But yeah, if I was talking to students, I would absolutely, I think most students don't even really know, even to this point, that they shouldn't trust what they see on Twitter. I think maybe they have a concept, but I think most people, including myself, I see things and I tend to trust it immediately. So perhaps putting those things up on the screen and engaging in some critical analysis and sort of proving to the students, oh wow, a lot of what you see on social media is just nonsense, right? It's just pure either entertainment, marketing, sales stuff, whatever. And then once you've established that, hey, we're also dealing with something similar here, except AI isn't trying to sell you anything necessarily because it's not a person, but you still have language that's coming at you, very similar in that regard. Language that's coming at you that is essentially, I don't know, it's a sort of BS-ish.
Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Another question, how can we make AI literacy and prompt engineering accessible to everyone, regardless of their technical background? Is there a role that higher education should be playing in this process?
Yeah, I think the first answer is to honestly take that slide from the very beginning, which shows people that this is a conversation and it's not actually a tech skill. I think this is really hard for our brains to process because it occurs on a technological platform, but because it's a conversational dialogue where again you could say I'm speaking, right? I'm speaking questions and then listening to answers. It technically is accessible to everybody. And that's the first thing I would say to my students is like, hey, you don't need to be tech savvy. I'm not tech savvy. I've never been tech savvy in my entire life. And now I'm out here teaching AI literacy. And it's because I'm a writer. And it's because I taught English. It's not because I'm tech savvy. And this is a shift. It's going to take time, but this is a shift that really everybody needs to kind of recognize, in my opinion, because it makes the entire process significantly less overwhelming. And you start to recognize, again, I have these skills already, right? I've been in, weird conversations before, and that's kind of what I'm doing here with this sort of collaborative engine.
Awesome. Next one. Can you share ideas on how to have ChatGPT be effective with assessment in courses?
Yes, this is actually what we're working on in the craft program. Last year, the approach that I took was to give my students open-ended tasks to complete. I tried to make them as broad as possible so my students would want help. And then I said, okay, you're going to talk to ChatGPT as your sort of brainstorm collaboration partner, but you're going to share the chat with me. And I'm actually going to grade the chat transcript as a piece of the larger assessment portfolio. So they still did their essay. I still graded their essay. I just reduced the value and I increased the value of the transcript. And so that does a lot of things. I mean, that's sort of an AI literacy thing, but it gets them using it, but it also gets them slowing down when they use it because they know their teacher is going to look at it. And so they get really, really thoughtful with their prompts and their communication in that context. And then subsequently, ChatGPT is more helpful and safer all at the same time. That's a complex process, but that is honestly one of the biggest things I'm working on right now.
All righty. We've got a couple questions left.
Mhm.
This is always, this is a common conversation when we're talking about generative AI. How do you detect if a student's paper is written by AI or assisted by AI? And are there tools out there that can detect this accurately?
No. The short answer is no. AI detection software does not work. You should look at that as snake oil. They are selling it. I hate to kind of be sort of petty this way, but they're selling it because they are trying to capitalize on your desire to detect AI writing. But it doesn't work. There are tons of false positives. I will say one tool that I used last year that you might consider is called linguistic fingerprinting. And it sounds quite complicated, but it's not as complicated as you think. And what it essentially does is it establishes a student's writing fingerprint up front, at the beginning of the year, beginning of the course, whatever it may be. And later on, if they submit something and you're not really sure, you run it through this system. It's not going to try to detect whether or not AI wrote it. It's going to try to detect whether or not the student wrote it. So it's a really interesting approach. It was effective for me. And if you're looking for more information on that, let me know.
Wonderful. We've got another question from one of our co-sponsors for the series, and they're kind of together, but I'll start with this one that's in our Q&A and then end with that last question. And they kind of go in tandem. So how should universities adapt their curricula to equip students with the knowledge and skills needed to navigate a world increasingly shaped by LLMs, including ethical considerations and critical thinking around their use?
Transcript analysis and grading the chats. You're going to develop ethical considerations about using AI by asking them to analyze their own use or other people's use. They will start to develop an understanding of what safe use looks like by engaging in that. It will also deepen their critical thinking by really reshaping their relationship to the technologies around them and creating distance between their own use and the way that they think in the moment. And then the second part is adapting curricula. I sort of described it before, but putting it in front of them and saying, hey, I care about how you use AI now just as much as I care about everything else. I think a lot of people are reluctant to do this, and there are good reasons to be sort of cautious. but I really view it as the future of education.
Awesome. And we do have a comment related to that last question. So we have learners begin with prompt outlines that we provide that require them to insert information to personalize where that info basically makes them have to go and think or go through the thought process we're trying to teach them. So that's a strategy that
Yeah.
one of our attendees shared.
Yeah.
And our last question, what effective arguments have you seen motivate administrators to move on AI literacy for faculty, staff, and students at an institutional level? This is a big question. I know we have universities across the country, across the world are trying to figure this one out.
Yeah, that is the $1,000,000 question, I think. I think it honestly starts with a teacher. I don't think it comes from the outside. I don't think it's an external, what's the right word? An external, button that's pushed. I think if enough teachers go to their administration and kind of say, this is crazy, we really need AI literacy, because an administrator wants happy employees. And if employees are not happy with the level of training that they're getting, for whatever reason, you guys know what that relationship is like more than I do. So, of course, navigate it the way that you would want to. But to me, yeah, and actually my colleague and I, we were talking about this the other day. It's teacher led. I think that it's a big misconception that the curriculum reform and the changes that need to happen at universities are going to be administrative led. It's not actually the case. It's going to be teacher led. Teachers are first going to experiment, then they're going to realize some things, then they're going to push their administrators. Next thing you know, the ball starts rolling downhill.
Mike, thank you so much for your time. We were able to answer so many questions. This was wonderful. Thank you so much. Any last thoughts, Mike or Jessica?
None for me. I just want to thank everyone for being here. And again, please feel free to reach out. I want to interact with as much as I can with the education community on these questions.
Thank you, Mike. That was wonderful. John and Henry, do you have any question or any final thoughts? And then on the screen now, for those that are still in the room, we have an exit survey. Please take a couple minutes so we can continue to learn what you guys want to know about. And then our next session, which is in November, will include use cases and different faculty from across institutions, as well as 2 different Center for Entrepreneurships who will be coming and sharing those use cases with you. So we're excited for that as well. John and Henry, if you have any final thoughts.
And just thanks, Mike. You're a really brilliant presentation, really clear, really helped kind of set the landscape. So we appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, ditto. I learned a lot today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that feedback.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next month.